guerra sempre vai existir. Mas para voltar para casa, Furiosa lutou contra o mundo.
Lembra de mim?
So, George, I was reading the Edgar Wright reaction to Furiosa, and the first thing he said was he had no clue how you pulled it off. And it was pretty much the same sentiment Steve Soderbergh had a few years back after watching Fury Road. So my question is, how did you pull it off? I mean, how hard it was to plan and execute a movie like Furiosa?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, every film is difficult. If you're trying to do something, you're trying to make something uniquely familiar. You can't repeat what you did before. This film is definitely goes hand in hand with Fury Road. This film runs directly into the second film. In order to write this story, in order to tell the story of Fury Road, we had to know everything about the world. That story happens over 3 days and 2 nights. This one, but the Furiosa story, at least for the purposes of this story, goes from when she's age 10 to around about when she's 28. We had to write a story about Max in the year before we meet him in Fury Road. There's no other way to have done Fury Road. So one way or another, we decided after Fury Road was done to tell the story of Furiosa. One of the big attractions is to take the things we learned from Fury Road, using all the technologies of previs or storyboarding previs, and then being able to use digital filmmaking, which I'd never used before in an action movie, to do things that you could never do before. With the agility of the camera, the plasticity of the frame, you can do so much in the frame rather than just cutting the beginning and the end of the shot. You can do that in post. You can do so much more. One was happened almost in real time, where the opening act and the closing act are real-time events. In Furiosa, it's a saga that happens over that extended period of time. And a different exercise, using some of the same tools, but just for my sake and my colleagues' sake, and ultimately the audience sake, you need it to be, as I said, uniquely familiar. It can't be the same film. So that's part of the answer to your question.
So, George, the original Mad Max, especially the Road Warrior, seemed to reflect in a fantastic way the oil crisis at the time. And Fury Road kind of shifted the focus to the water and natural resources crisis that we face in the new century. And now we see a clash of power in Furiosa, of mad leaders trying to embrace what's left of civilization. So is this the most political installment of the story?
I think it is. Basically telling the story of this world and telling it through the relative intimacy of an individual, and seeing that individual and the world around them in extremis. You end up you end up trying to see all the dynamics, all the various forces that basically impinge on her and the world around us, just as we do in the world that you and I are existing in today. We live our individual lives, and yet there's all this chaos that is bewildering, that we're all bewildered by one way or another, trying to make sense of it. I personally believe that's always been the condition of human beings, whether it's political or otherwise. It's a contradiction of human beings, where we live in chaos and we're trying to make meaning out of it. So that can't help but seep into a story like Furiosa.
As the world of Mad Max expands, would you like to see wasteland stories created by other filmmakers?
Oh yeah, I would like that, but particularly if they're filmmakers who have a comprehensive approach, a multi-layered approach to filmmaking, using all the tools and techniques of filmmaking to tell stories. And you know, there's several filmmakers that I'd love to see their versions of them if they're not already doing those stories themselves. Yeah.
A few years back, you worked for quite some time in the Justice League movie, and that project unfortunately fell apart. Is going back to the world of superheroes something that appeals to you?
I find myself interested in mythology and allegory because they're stories which have the best chance of being. They have poetic, let's say, elements. They kind of allow the audience their own interpretation according to their own worldview. Again, the person who articulated those sort of ideas best was Joseph Campbell, who earned his authority by spending 40 years alone in a library, working out, basically collating all the stories of humankind and seeing where they overlap, and comes up with the notion of the monomyth and the hero with 1,000 faces, which is in all our narratives, whatever culture, whether they're children's fairy tales or even nursery rhymes, whether they're anecdotes told by families, whether they're communal stories, national stories, mythological stories, religious traditions. I guess they're the things that drive me. And so, and there's no question the superhero movies are a direct descendants of the Greek, Roman, Norse gods. That's a very rich, story mind to feel. So I'm always interested in those stories.
Wow.